I will never forget that day. It was a cold October morning when I got a call from Sheriff Johnson. I have worked as a criminal investigator in Maine for 15 years and thought I had seen it all, but this connection would change my life forever. Lewis, I need you to come to Baxter Forest. A group of Boy Scouts found something disturbing, he said in a strained voice I'd never heard before. When I arrived at the scene, I saw a small crowd of police officers around a fallen tree. Among the dry branches and leaves, there was an old camcorder, the kind that still used tapes. The strange thing is that it appeared to have been left there recently. It had no signs of degradation due to time or climate. While the forensic technicians were doing their work, something bothered me deeply about that scene. Marks on the floor around it made no sense. It was as if the person who left the camera there had disappeared into thin air. At the department, we were able to recover the contents of the tape. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw in that dark evidence room. The recording started like an ordinary family video, but in the first few seconds, my blood ran cold. 15 years of homicide experience wasn't enough to prepare me for those images. It's been 3 months since we found that camera, and to this day, I still can't sleep well. What happened to that family that night continues to haunt me. And what's worse, the evidence we found later only made everything even more terrifying. When I first pressed play on that tape, the images showed a family, father, mother, and 2 children, getting out of a silver minivan at around 8 p.m. Video quality was surprisingly good for an old camera. The date in the bottom corner read, July 15th, 2023. The father, a tall man in his 40s, held the camera and excitedly narrated, "And here we are, starting our overnight camping adventure. Sarah, say hi to the camera, princess." A girl of about 8 years old waved shyly, while her younger brother, Tommy, jumped excitedly with a flashlight in his hands. The mother, wearing a red jacket, organized camping equipment. "Mike, stop filming and come help." "Swing," she said, laughing, but didn't seem really bothered. The chosen place to camp was a beautiful clearing, surrounded by tall pine trees that were lost in the darkness. While watching, I noticed a detail that made me pause the video several times. In the background, almost imperceptible among the trees, there was a strange reflection. At first, I thought it was just the moon shining on the leaves, but the more I looked, the more it seemed like watching the family. The camera continued recording as they set up the tent, and the children's laughter echoed through the forest. But there was something wrong with that seemingly innocent scene, something I only realized after watching it for the 10th time. The sound of the wind in the trees had completely stopped, as if nature itself had held its breath. As I continued watching the recording, my eyes began to notice something that didn't seem natural. It was around 9:37 p.m. in the video's timestamp, and the family was still walking calmly along the state park trail. It was then that I realized the shadows of the trees were not moving in the correct direction of the wind. The father was holding the camera, filming the children running ahead, when the moonlight broke through the treetops. The shadows, they twisted in impossible directions, as if they had a life of their own. At one specific moment, all the shadows seemed to point to the same place, converging on a dark spot between the trees to the right. I paused the video several times at this point, increasing the screen brightness to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. There was no logical explanation. Even in gusts of wind, shadows don't behave that way. And then came that sound. Low, almost imperceptible at first. A low buzzing sound that gradually increased in the recording, as if something was approaching. The audio quality began to deteriorate. Strange squeaks appeared between the children's laughter. Every few seconds, the image experienced minimal interference, so subtle that if you blinked, you'd miss it. But it was there, little glitches, as if something was trying to manifest itself through the recording. The most disturbing thing was when I noticed that during these interferences, people's shadows simply disappeared for a fraction of a second, as if, for a brief moment, they weren't really there. No one in the family seemed to realize it yet, but something was very, very wrong that night. Little Tommy was the first to stop. In the video, you can clearly see the moment his smile disappears. He had just turned 7 and was a few feet in front of his older sister, Sarah, who was 12. Suddenly, he froze in place, his body rigid as a statue. "Tommy, what's wrong?" The father's voice echoes through the recording, still without real concern in the tone. The camera shakes slightly as he approaches his son. Sarah, who was playing jumping between the dry leaves on the path, also stops. His eyes widen, fixed on something beyond the trees. "Dad." His voice shakes. "There's someone there." She points to a space between two ancient oak trees where the darkness seemed thicker than usual. The camera turns sharply in the indicated direction, but only captures darkness. When he returns to the children, Tommy is silently crying, tears streaming down his pale face. "They're everywhere," he whispers, so low you can barely hear it on the recording. His eyes move quickly from side to side, as if following movements that the camera could not capture. Sarah begins to slowly back away towards her parents, her hesitant steps making the dry leaves crunch. "They're watching us," she murmurs, her voice cracking with fear. "Dad, please let's go." Tommy remains transfixed, and when the moonlight breaks through the clouds, you can see that his lips are moving, repeating something inaudible, while his staring eyes seem to follow invisible presences dancing in the shadows around us. Reviewing the recording for the 100th time, I still feel my stomach drop as I notice the movements. At first, they are subtle, almost imperceptible. The camera remains focused on the scared children, but at the edges of the frame, something moves. They are not tree shadows. They are not nocturnal animals. They are dark shapes that seem to move against the wind. At a specific moment, 22 minutes and 13 seconds into the recording, a tall silhouette, very tall, crosses the background of the scene at an unnatural speed. It's as if it slides a few centimeters above the ground. The movement is so fast that you can only perceive it frame by frame. 3 impossible steps, and she disappears behind a tree too thick to hide something that size. But the worst was to come. As the father tries to calm Tommy, who remains paralyzed, the camera captures something that made me scream the first time I watched it. Among the more distant trees, various shapes begin to materialize. They are not solid. They appear to be made of a dark, dense mist. They move in sync, as if performing a macabre dance. One of them tilts what appears to be her head at an impossible angle, almost 180 degrees. The recording clearly shows. There are at least 7 or 8 of these things. They begin to form a semicircle around the family, still keeping their distance, but clearly getting closer. The movement is so subtle that if you blinked, you'd miss it. But they are definitely getting closer every second. At one point, one of the shapes appears to notice the camera. It's just one frame, but you can see it with disturbing clarity. Where there should be a face, there is only a deep, dark void with 2 luminescent dots that seem to look directly through the lens. At that exact moment, the temperature of the video drops drastically. You can see the family's breath starting to form small clouds of vapor in the air, even though it's a summer night. The mother was a few steps behind, taking the bottle of water from her backpack when everything happened. "Mark!" Her scream cuts through the recording like an icy blade. "Take the children. Now!" The camera pans violently, capturing the woman's face transformed by pure terror. His eyes, wide and fixed on something above our heads, reflect a horror that words cannot describe. She drops her backpack, hands shaking uncontrollably as she steps back. They're everywhere." His voice trails off, a whisper punctuated by labored breaths. What happens next is disturbing. The camera records the exact moment the mother's hair begins to move, as if an invisible breeze caresses it from below, defying gravity. His pupils dilate so much that his eyes appear completely black. "They're not human," she mutters, her words emerging in clouds of icy vapor. "Mark, they were never human." She tries to run toward the children, but her movements are slow, as if the air has become thick like molasses. The camera captures the moment something that shouldn't exist, touches your shoulder. I can't see clearly what it is, but her expression, that expression will haunt me forever. Your face contorts in a silent scream, tears instantly freezing on your cheeks. "Don't look at them," she screams with a strength that didn't seem possible to come from her trembling body. "Close your eyes. Close your eyes now." Her voice breaks into desperate sobs as she finally manages to reach Tommy, gripping him tightly. The boy, still in a trance, continues muttering something that the recording cannot capture, his eyes fixed on the void that now seemed to swallow all the light around us. It was there, at that moment, that reality became a nightmare, when everything seemed to be happening slowly, but at the same time too fast to understand. The night around us was suffocating, as if it were squeezing us from all sides. The trees seemed to close in, and the ground was filled with moving shadows, changing shape with each hurried step. I held the children's hands tightly, listening to their breathing become more rapid and ragged, a mixture of fear and exhaustion that they tried to hide. And every time I looked back, hoping to find an explanation, a face, a silhouette, I saw nothing. But the silence, that crushing silence as heavy as lead, told me that we were not alone. The camera swayed as we ran, capturing fragments, the children's faces, pale, eyes wide and reflecting pure fear. My wife's breathing was ragged, almost as if she was holding her breath, expecting the worst with every step. Her fear pierced me, made me want to go faster, but my legs seemed like they weren't obeying. And suddenly, the sound, a low noise that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, as if something was following us, imitating our every movement, our every sigh. It was barely noticeable, but I knew it was real. I knew it was the kind of sound that comes from the dark and shouldn't be there. At that time, all I wanted was to keep the kids safe. I felt the weight of responsibility like never before. But at the same time, terror was building in me, rising like a wave about to swallow me. And I knew that whatever it was behind us, it wasn't going to stop. After everything we went through that night, I thought I had seen enough. That nightmare was over. That the camera and the footage would only serve to confirm that everything was just an illusion. That it was our mind playing tricks. But then came the freeze frame guy. It was the kind of thing we think we'll only see in a movie. We were watching the video for the last time, holding our breath, hoping there was nothing but shadows and trees in the background. But in a moment, out of nowhere, the screen stopped. The image froze, and I felt an instant chill. It wasn't me who paused. It wasn't anyone. It just stopped. The camera captured my face turned back, and a part of the forest in the background, misty and distorted by the rush and the swing of the run. But behind me, in the shadows, there was something that shouldn't be there. At first, it looked like a blur, a distortion of light perhaps. I stared at that spot, trying to convince myself that it was just a strange shadow, a trick of the camera. But as the image seemed to brighten, as if it were becoming clearer just for me, a shape began to reveal itself. It was a face, but not an ordinary face, expressionless, but with empty eyes that seemed to pass through the screen. It wasn't blurry, it wasn't out of focus, it was crystal clear, unforgiving. The feeling was as if he knew I was there, watching, as if that frozen moment was watching us back, with an absurd coldness, as if he was expecting something from me. For a moment, I thought the face was going to move. After seeing that face on the recording, I could no longer sleep properly, breathe properly. That wouldn't get out of my head. I knew there was something more. That frozen image wasn't just a coincidence, a strange effect of light and shadow. I decided to take the video for analysis. I wanted answers. Or maybe I just wanted someone to tell me it was all crazy, that I was imagining things. But the experts saw the same thing I did. I watched as they projected the video onto large screens, paused it, rewinded it, adjusted brightness and contrast. The lab felt colder, the air thicker by the second. And it was then that they first zoomed in on the face. The same face I saw on the screen, the eyes fixed, empty. One of them, one of the more experienced experts, began to sweat, and the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Then came their diagnosis. There were no signs of manipulation. There was no post-production effect, nothing that would justify that face appearing in the video. Even worse, they noticed something I hadn't even noticed before. By increasing the contrast, other details began to emerge. There was something at the edges of the frame, little smudges that, when magnified, appeared to be hands. Shadowy, skeletal hands reaching out of the shadows behind us, as if that figure was not just watching, but trying to reach out of the darkness. The experts were speechless, exchanging looks of disbelief and uneasiness. One of them mentioned, almost as if he was thinking out loud, that he had seen something like this before, but never in an amateur video. It was the kind of thing that appeared in reports of haunted places, things that no one could explain. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet. At that moment, I realized that what we had captured was neither an illusion nor a trick. After that analysis, I realized that what we had captured was much more than a strange figure or shadow on the screen. There was a truth there, hidden in that last frozen image, a truth that seemed somehow to have been waiting for us from the beginning, as if it knew we would find it. I spent nights going over the recording, looking for any detail, any clue that would make me understand what was really happening. The figure in the background, that face, the hands in the shadows, they were like fragments of something larger, a story that I could only glimpse but never fully touch. I felt like it was consuming me, pulling me to a place where reality and illusion mixed, surrounding me with the same darkness as that night. It was then that one of the experts, already hesitant and not knowing how to explain it, suggested that that face might not just be an image, that in some way, maybe it was an echo. He explained that in some isolated places, there are reports of people who captured inexplicable moments, as if the camera itself could record a reflection of what was lurking, entities that are trapped, presences that cannot completely cross, but that appear, waiting to be seen by whoever dares to face it. That chilled me to the bone. I thought about those sleepless nights, the weight of that presence still hovering around. The specialist looked at me seriously and said, "The only way to get rid of something like this is to leave the video behind, destroy, not to see again." But I couldn't. It was as if the face was calling to me, as if there was something more it wanted to show, something it hadn't revealed yet. And since then, every time I close my eyes, I feel like it's still there, waiting for the next look, the next attempt to understand, as if somehow that echo was still watching me. So, would you face these images until the end? Or would you prefer the truth to remain in the shadows? If you want to discover more disturbing stories like this, full of inexplicable secrets and mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, the unknown is always lurking. See you in the next video, if you dare.